Tonight on Ukraine Today, Flamingo in action. What did Ukrainian missiles hit? What consequences were recorded and published by OSINT analysts? Chemical threat. Under what conditions could the Kremlin regime use weapons of mass destruction? A summit in Kyiv or Moscow? The United States says a meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin may happen soon. A game-changing weapon. Trump spoke about the use of the Discombobulator. What is known about it? All this and more, right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and let's move to the news. Let's start with the battlefield situation with the Pokrovsk direction. There, the Russian forces have concentrated around 100,000 occupiers. The technological component has also been reinforced. The enemy has transferred specialized drone units to the area. However, Ukraine's defense forces are holding back the pressure. More details from the front line in the report.
Russia is once again trying to break through the border. Thus, in the Kyiv region, the Ukrainian armed forces repelled a new assault by the occupiers who were attempting to break through our defenses. According to Viktor Tregubov, head of communications for the Joint Forces Group, the enemy is trying to create a so-called buffer zone in the Kyiv and Sumy regions, but is failing. At the same time, apparently understanding their prospects here, the Russian army is hardly using heavy armored vehicles, instead advancing in small infantry groups of 15 to 20 people. However, Russia has used the tactic of advancing in columns in another direction, Pokrovsk. The result is just as predictable. Even as the group was approaching, our reconnaissance drones spotted them, after which they were hit by strike drones and artillery.
The Russian column was destroyed in open fields, and the infantry was finished off in the tree line, while the artillery was eliminated by precise strikes from Ukrainian kamikaze drones. All that was left at the scene for the Russians were burned-out vehicles, dismembered bodies, and 3 prisoners who have now joined Ukraine's exchange pool.
The Russians' attempt to storm Pokrovsk with small groups also ended in failure, according to the 7th Air Assault Corps. On the other side of the city, in the industrial zone to the northwest, strike drones targeted the attackers, after which the positions where the occupiers had taken cover were destroyed by 155mm artillery.
As a result, 3 assault troops were torn apart before they even managed to take up their positions. Abandoned by their own, without evacuation or cover, they were apparently wounded at first, but ended up lying forever on the frozen ground.
Notably, despite a complete failure in the Pokrovsk area in 2026, the Russians keep claiming that the settlement has been captured and is under their control. According to experts, this is primarily aimed at the United States, with whom negotiations are taking place in the United Arab Emirates.
They've already taken Pokrovsk 18 times, I counted. Turned out to be 6. Yes, the fighting is heavy. Yes, they are partially in the city, in most of it. But we are holding our positions and destroying the largest number of enemy forces there. That's why this fake is being countered with concrete, specific facts.
Not least, the destruction of Russian logistics, which suffers daily from Ukrainian strikes, helps the Ukrainian armed forces hold their positions near Pokrovsk and in the city itself. As a result, even the routes that Russia already considered main ones stop functioning, and the enemy simply cannot effectively amass forces or launch attacks.
We see that the enemy is trying to move through the city, but right now we are identifying their points of concentration in the city, counterattacking and carrying out strikes on specific locations where they are stationed or where troops are being brought in. Right now, it's crucial to strike at the logistics and supply systems of the Russian troops. For example, those on the Pokrovska and Mirnograd directions had their logistics very well organized, but we've practically cut them off. Even though they are partially present in the city of Mirnograd, we are holding our positions there, with well-fortified areas, and without logistics, they cannot attack effectively.
Moreover, while Russia used to constantly set certain deadlines for the fall of Ukrainian defenses in the Pokrovsky direction, now they don't mention them at all. Instead, cautious forecasts are now coming from the defense forces. In particular, if we manage to hold out in Pokrovsk until March, then Russia simply won't be able to advance here any further.
If everything that has been planned succeeds, then the Russian army will start to stall. Even today, there are already the first signs that it's starting to stall a little, although it relies on a huge number of personnel, but it is stalling. And by spring, it is quite likely that these losses will indeed increase, and while they may not yet be completely critical for the Russians, it will really become very difficult for them to replenish them.
It's also worth mentioning the south of Ukraine. In recent weeks, the second hottest spot in this war has become the settlement of Huliapol. For about a week, the Russians have been actively transferring reserves here to maintain the pace of their advance. However, it is already clear today that this idea has failed.
Well, yesterday, right in Huliapol itself, the situation was generally stabilized. A few days ago, we reinforced the reserves at both the brigade and regimental levels. More experienced units, not only, so to speak, our units that were formed as volunteers, but also those that were already stationed in this sector. These are now professionals who are working on specific targets within Huliapol itself.
Moreover, the Ukrainian command, without revealing details for now, reported that in the south, not only are they managing to hold back the occupiers' offensive, but in some places they are even driving them out of their positions and successfully counterattacking.
Today, we can say that on one of the directions of the Zaporizhia front, our defense forces, for example, managed to counterattack Russian positions and reclaim our previous tactical positions. This is the response on the battlefield.
Over the past day, Russia has lost at least 1,020 occupiers, killed and wounded. That brings total Russian losses since the start of the full-scale invasion to 1,235,060 troops. In addition, over the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 1 armored combat vehicle, 32 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. In the event of a prolonged war in Ukraine, Putin may use chemical weapons of mass destruction. This is reported by The Times. The occupiers have already used chlorpicrin, a choking agent first employed during the First World War. However, according to the publication, Western officials are concerned that chlorpicrin is not the full extent of Russia's arsenal. For example, the use of Novichok would lead to catastrophic consequences and the death of thousands of people. The question is where the Putin regime would decide to use chemical weapons, on the battlefield or against Ukraine's civilian population, because terror has become the trademark of Russian occupiers. Here are images of a direct hit by a Russian drone on a civilian apartment building in Kharkiv. People were injured. This is not a military facility, not a defense industry plant, just a residential high-rise. And this is only one of many documented Russian war crimes. Here's another one. In Kyiv, a Russian Shahed drone attack damaged the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra. In several buildings, blast waves shattered windows and doors. Walls and interior elements were cracked. This was done by those who call themselves defenders of believers, Russian army of killers and rapists. Ukrainian drones have reached Russia's Krasnodar region. An oil refinery is on fire there. In addition, reports are coming in about strikes on enemy positions in temporarily occupied Luhansk. Ukrainian Flamingo missiles struck a contractor facility involved in the production of MiG and Sukhoi aircraft in Russia. OSINT analysts have published confirmation. The attack took place on the 23rd of September last year. Satellite images show the Skifem plant in Belgorod. The missiles demonstrated high precision and the facility suffered significant damage. Since we're already talking about Belgorod, the city has experienced what a blackout and real cold feel like. This is a mirror response by Ukraine to Russia's treacherous strikes on critical infrastructure.
The blackout is slowly but surely spreading across the territory of the Russian Federation. Following Belgorod, Taganrog and Perm have also been left without electricity, water, and heating.
So basically, nothing has changed. That is, the area is disconnected.
Judging by information in Russian public channels, Belgorod was the first to come under a massive strike. On Saturday, after 9 p.m., the city was attacked nearly 100 times, and local residents counted up to 50 powerful explosions.
Ukrainian forces tore Belgorod's power system to shreds, once again leaving tens and hundreds of thousands of people without electricity and heat, which will be a disaster for the local population in the current 15-degree frosts. Kyiv has unleashed holy vengeance for energy terror on this region of Russia, where hordes of occupiers are based and from where they launch their raids on the Kharkiv region.
The attack was so effective that the Russian authorities had to hastily invent yet another set of tall tales to somehow justify the scale of the destruction and the inability of Russian air defenses to counter Ukrainian drones. As a result, the region's governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov, spun a story that the shelling was carried out by HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems. It was supposedly his debris that local residents found near the explosion sites.
Guys, good evening. The city was just shelled 3 times. We're just pulling up to the house and there's this chunk lying here.
However, the object that Kremlin propaganda is passing off as a HIMARS fragment doesn't stand up to any scrutiny.
This is clearly not a HIMARS fragment because, you see, it's a rather large metal piece and it's flat. Usually when we see pieces of a missile, they're generally curved. If it's like the casing, there might be, I don't know, tubes or microchips if it's the internal part of the missile. That's why I strongly suspect that the metal, well, the metal thing the eyewitness showed, most likely doesn't belong to any kind of weapon.
So it turns out that Putin's much-praised Russian air defense can't even handle ordinary Ukrainian drones anymore. After the latest attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces on the Russian capital, the Kremlin is pulling more and more forces toward Moscow, analysts explain, effectively leaving the regions without air defense. The same air defense that remains, due to Ukrainian blackouts, is operating with major disruptions.
The Russian air defense simply doesn't have time to respond. And as is well known, it has been significantly deprived of power and greatly reduced after numerous waves of strikes against this very air defense system in various regions.
But instead of patching up the holes in its air defense, the Russian command is taking a much simpler approach. It orders all information about strikes on Belgorod and elsewhere to be concealed.
However, this doesn't just apply to Belgorod. The fact is that since yesterday and throughout last night, power outages occurred not only in the Belgorod region, but also in other Russian regions. Under the pretext of scheduled maintenance or brief incidents, the Kremlin authorities are trying to conceal the true scale of the destruction and avoid panic.
But how can you avoid nationwide panic when a blackout personally provoked by Putin and the war he unleashed is spreading across the country at an unprecedented speed? The list of cities and regions currently without electricity and heat includes Murmansk, Severomorsk, Zakhamsk, Oryol, Taganrog, Rostov region, Podolsk, Suraysk, Khimki, Chukovsky, Elektrostal.
Moscow can now no longer adequately cope with the devastating consequences of the intense aerial war that it originally started itself.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is a perfect moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video and share it. Please do it. Thank you. And glory to Ukraine. Russia is using Belarus as a testing ground to blackmail Europe and the rest of the world with Oreshnik missiles. This was stated by President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy during his visit to Lithuania. According to him, Minsk dependence on Moscow is not decreasing.
Operators of Russian Shahed drones attack drones are working against Ukraine, including from the territory of Belarus. The communication used for these strikes is also maintained from Belarus. Russia is using Belarus as a testing ground to blackmail Europe and the world with Oreshnik missiles. Belarusian industry is working for Russia's war, and trade links are helping Putin buy the components he needs to build a threat against all of us in Europe. That is why it is important for Europe not to lose a single nation that lives by freedom. That is why it is critical for Europe not to lose time. And that is why all of us in Europe must work every day for a strong Europe.
Meanwhile, in the United States, officials have spoken about a possible meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin in the near future. This is reported by Axios. The publication notes that trilateral contacts in Abu Dhabi became a critically important step toward the next stage of negotiations. According to one US official, another trilateral meeting in Abu Dhabi could open the way for talks to be held directly in Moscow or in Kyiv. Optimism is good, but let's look at the situation realistically. The Kremlin is interested in continuing the war because it believes time is on its side. Moscow is once again dragging out negotiations by putting forward unrealistic demands, while at the same time carrying out massive strikes against Ukraine. In other words, it combines terror with lies about its readiness to negotiate. Here's one example. Moscow insists on the withdrawal of Ukraine's armed forces from the non-occupied part of the Donetsk region. It wants Ukraine to simply give up its cities and towns, and only then, they say, talks would be possible. But why would Russia negotiate under such conditions? It would end up in a strategically stronger position and theoretically could advance deeper into Ukrainian territory.
Do Russians want war? The Kremlin is not ready for real negotiations to end the war. This was reported by Ukrainian intelligence. According to Oleg Lugovsky, first deputy head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, Moscow is currently betting not on dialogue, but on buying time. The Kremlin is counting on an offensive at the front and energy tear with blackouts to break the Ukrainians and impose its own terms.
The energy system itself is Putin's target. His goal is Ukrainian society, which he wants to pressure into forcing the Ukrainian authorities to capitulate.
A representative of Ukrainian intelligence also commented on these so-called red lines of the Kremlin in negotiations. According to him, Russia has several of these, and they are adjusted from time to time. Among the key demands are that Ukraine does not join security alliances and that there are no foreign troops on its territory. At the same time, Lugoyskoy emphasized that Moscow can formulate new red lines at any moment to drag out the negotiation process.
Russia is ready for negotiations. Russia wants negotiations about Ukraine's capitulation. Russia is ready to negotiate Ukraine's capitulation. The United States, to be precise, the Trump administration is ready for peace talks. They are not interested in the parameters of peace at all. They are interested in a ceasefire. Russia is interested in the end of Ukraine, its existence, Ukraine's capitulation. We are interested in a just peace.
There are other facts that show Russia is actually not interested in peace. The Kremlin is ramping up military production to continue terrorizing Ukrainian cities. In particular, Russia has started using a new high-speed model of the Gerin 5 drone against Ukraine. At the same time, the key components for these jet-powered drones. According to Ukrainian intelligence, Chinese and Western companies are supplying them. This was reported by the British publication The Guardian. Since the beginning of this year, 2 such drones have been shot down, one near Kyiv and the other near Dnipro. The Gerin 5 has a flight range of just under 1,000 kilometers and can carry a payload of 90 kilograms. It is assumed that Russia hopes to further extend the weapon's range by launching it into the air from a manned jet aircraft.
Russia wants to crush Ukraine, destroy it as a state. That is Putin's goal. He is ready to achieve it by military means as well as by any other means. If it can be achieved through diplomatic means and with the automatic lifting of sanctions from Russia, that's just a bonus. And we see this. Europeans see it. America sees it. But everyone has different goals. Our task is to survive. The Europeans' task is to maintain stability on the European continent and prevent a threat from the east, a Russian threat from the east. Trump's task. To put another checkmark for himself. I stopped another war, preferably making good money from it. More precisely, not just preferably, but necessarily, making good money from it.
President Zelenskyy, in a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, stated that Russia appears to be producing more drones, up to 500 a day, and ballistic missiles than it is using for attacks. According to a report prepared this week by the Institute for Science and International Security, Moscow appears to be focused on technological developments to overcome Ukrainian air defenses. Currently,
there is an increase in the number of drones of the type Shahed equipped with video cameras, online and radio modems compared to the total number of such UAVs. Implementing such upgrades requires the use of specialized equipment and the presence of operators who have undergone the necessary training.
Among other innovations reported this year by Ukrainian intelligence are Garin-2 drones, which are allegedly being equipped with man-portable air defense missiles to target Ukrainian aircraft. That attempt to intercept them. All of this points to one thing. Russia has no intention of stopping the war. On the contrary, it is doing everything it can to intensify and escalate its attacks.
Here's another example of Kremlin arrogance. Russia proposes to divide electricity from the Ukrainian Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant between Russia and Ukraine. This is reported by Politico. Much of the recent negotiations focused on who would control the plant, which is currently occupied by Russian forces. It is important to note that no agreement on this issue has been reached. Finally, about a game-changing weapon. Trump spoke about the use of the Discombobulator. This allegedly took place during the operation in Venezuela. Here's what's known about this device.
America's enemies are terrified. Washington has invented and already tested a secret weapon on the battlefield. According to Donald Trump, the first use occurred during the operation to capture Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro.
The Discombobulator, we can't talk about it. They never managed to launch their missiles. They had Russian and Chinese missiles, and not a single one worked. We went in, they were pressing buttons, but nothing worked. They were fully prepared for our attack.
The word discombobulator translates from English as to confuse or to disorient. Following the statement from the head of the White House, the Pentagon also confirmed the existence of the new weapon. Lethality at the speed of light. Dominance of directed energy. Very little is known about the new weapon. According to reports in American media, in addition to affecting equipment as Trump described, the disorientator also targets people. In conversations with journalists, the security detail of Nicolas Maduro admitted that during the attack, they experienced the so-called Havana syndrome, a combination of unexplained neurological symptoms, dizziness, nausea, headaches, and problems with...
The individual is currently experiencing the physiological process of perceiving sound through their auditory system. The next thing we saw were drones. Numerous drones flying over our positions. At some point, they launched something. I don't know how to describe it. It seemed like a very intense sound wave. Suddenly, I felt as if my head exploded from the inside. All of us started bleeding from the nose. Some people were vomiting blood. We fell to the ground, unable to move.
The US does not hide the fact that the weapon successfully tested in Caracas could later be directed against Beijing and Moscow.
3 nights ago, in the center of Caracas, Venezuela, nearly 200 of our best American soldiers headed toward the city center. It seems the Russian air defense didn't work very well, did it?
But the US is far from alone in its developments. Most advanced powers are actively investing in the development of weapons of the future. Laser cannons as air defense systems are capable of shooting down both small drones and missiles, as well as large aircraft. Such weapons are being actively integrated into armed forces of countries like China, Britain, France, and Israel. In 2023, Japan became the first in the world to test so-called railguns. This is a weapon in which, instead of gunpowder, a magnetic field is used to give the projectile its initial velocity. The shift from explosives to electromagnetic technologies has taken the speed of launch projectiles to a new level.
The firing speed is approximately 2,300 meters per second. That's about 8,000 kilometers per hour, with a power of up to 5 million joules. The operating principle is an electromagnetic mass accelerator that propels a conductive projectile along 2 metal rails using the ampere force.
In the name of railguns, superpowers are working on both electromagnetic weapons and cannons. EMAs, by inducing high-voltage currents and high-frequency electromagnetic pulses, disable the enemy's electrical and electronic equipment. In this case, we are talking about both military equipment that uses electronics and missiles equipped with modern components, their own target-seeking radars, homing heads, or even simple GPS navigation receivers.
At the moment, it is primarily the defensive potential that is being developed, but the development of offensive weapons is not ruled out either. That is, not only countering aeroballistic strike systems, but also directly destroying the launchers themselves.
It seems that's all Putin and his occupiers can respond with. These are old Soviet-designed missiles, as well as new so-called analogs. Non-existent know-how that so far exists only in drawn propaganda videos.
4, 3, 2, 1. Launch towards Washington.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.